Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. As always, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com. And this week, you've got myself, Collin, and I'm joined by Nick as we talk about the opening weekend for Men in Black International, Shaft, The Dead Don't Die, and Late Night. Breaking down this week's top five, we've got Men in Black International opening up with $28.5 million, followed by The Secret Life of Pets 2 with $23.8, Aladdin still hanging on in the number 3 spot with $16.7 million, followed by Dark Phoenix with $9 million, and Rocketman rounds out the top five once again with $8.8 million. So it's been a pretty dismal week. I mean, this is just kind of sad looking at all these numbers, especially like when we've been looking at, Endgame and honestly pretty much just Endgame as far as blockbuster successes this year have gone. We've had like moderate stuff, but yeah, everything's just been kind of sad. Men in Black, this is the lowest opening in the franchise. This is not even a quarter of its budget, like estimated production budget that it got opening weekend. Worldwide, it's sitting around 100 million, so it's got some legs overseas, which I think they kind of banked on with how many locations this movie goes into. But yeah, this is just kind of a sad end to the franchise, I guess. I really don't see them just pursuing Men in Black International any further if it keeps pulling these numbers.
Yeah, I think we've seen the last of Men in Black, at least for like the next 50 years or something like that. I mean, we live on an infinite timeline, I guess, for these things, so I guess sometime at some point in the future it'd get rebooted. But yeah, we're kind of done with Men in Black for a while. It's been well documented that Sony has just been thirsting after IP for years, ever since back in the early 2010s, where the Marvel comics and just superhero movies in general became huge, and IP blockbusters, and they've just been scouring, just looking through their entire catalog and thinking, hey, what can we bring back? And they tried Men in Black, and you were the one who's seen it out of the two of us, and it's apparently not good. $110 million budget, only made 102 worldwide. So that's not good. You will at least want to get back your production budget in your opening weekend if you're going to suffer at all, and that this movie hasn't done that even. So yeah, this is not great. And there was even talk behind the scenes that there was production issues with Men in Black. So this is just a misfire for Sony, and it's another thing. All these sequels this summer have just been atrociously underperforming, and we'll get to a couple others in the top five here. But this isn't good. This is a bad summer so far.
Yeah, and I mean, Men in Black, so this is the fourth movie in the franchise. They've all opened up around like 52 million is probably the median. And yeah, Men in Black International is opening up at 28.5 domestic, so just a little over half of what, Men in Black 2, Men in Black 3, Men in Black 1 were all opening up. That was 20 years ago in the case of Men in Black 1. So yeah, this I'd say this franchise is kind of dead, which it was already dead before, and then they resurrected it for this, but that's kind of where we're at. And yeah, I saw it. It's sad because if you watch Thor Ragnarok, you know that like Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson have chemistry, and this movie just tries as hard as it can to like split up that chemistry and just keep them from being likable together on screen. And it just makes me sad, and like they don't really know what to do with Hemsworth's character. I honestly can't tell you if he's just like the most badass Men in Black agent ever, or if he's just a meathead because he like waffles back and forth every couple scenes. The plot twist, you'll be able to pick it out within the first scene pretty much. My biggest problem with this movie is it just felt like the people making it had never seen any of the other three and just tried to turn it into this high concept like gangster space movie, and just really lost like kind of the heart of what Will Smith brought to it with Men in Black 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, this was definitely a cold-hearted, just studio. Kind of feels like a studio mandated sequel here because it has all the bad markings of something they're just trying really really hard to just make into a massive franchise for years to come because it goes global. It just becomes a real, like you mentioned, just a big fun spy romp, I guess, and it forgets those like the first Men in Black movie is pretty solidly contained. It's just Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones being fun, and yeah, this movie just looks like it's just desperately trying to be Thor Ragnarok, but as you said, it failed. So, and this is really interesting because the director is F. Gary Gray, and he was the director behind The Fate of the Furious and just Straight Outta Compton. And I mean, you can say what you want about either of those movies, and Straight Outta Compton's a pretty decent movie, but guy knows how to make a blockbuster and make one successful and kind of feed into that audience. So this is just kind of a misfire, and I think that really speaks again to just. There was issues on this set, and they couldn't really figure out what they wanted to do with it. And it's a tough look for Sony. It's just there's nothing really positive to get out of this, except I hope Chris Hemsworth keeps getting other fun franchises other than Thor, because he's just great. And I hope the same for Tessa Thompson. So I don't know. This is a tough one.
Yeah, and I think it struggles a lot because it expands and like villain wise. Men in Black has always been really good about having like these villains that don't really have much in the way of a strong motivation, but they're like really entertaining and really stick out. I mean, like the first Men in Black villain's a giant cockroach, and like the villain in this movie, they like build up how powerful and unkillable it is, and then in the last act they like swap out for another villain that makes no sense. And yeah, this movie is just an intergalactic train wreck. It's one of the most soulless like blockbusters I've seen in a while.
So you're saying there isn't a Vincent D'Onofrio just yelling at people for more sugar water in this movie?
Unfortunately, no. There's like a space cloud that eventually becomes a squid, and I don't really understand the transition there.
This sounds like Galactus from the Fantastic Four movies. Am I right? Is it like that?
It almost is. And then so Kumail Nanjiani is in here as like this little chess piece alien, and he's like, it's really obvious that they like made this character, modeled it, put it in the movie, and then cast him because the voice does not fit with like half of the animation.
That's
so you see just like a lot of last minute stuff like that in the movie.
Oof. Yeah, and that really speaks to just being slapdashed and reshoots and things like that. Because it's if you're doing a ton of reshoots, you see, we'll talk about Dark Phoenix in a second, because that's just crashing and burning worse than this movie. But if you try to do a bunch of effects driven things and you keep going back to reshoots, like that's what gets your price going way out of control. So yeah.
Yeah, out of the two Emma Thompson movies this weekend, definitely pick the other one, and we'll talk about Late Night here in a little bit. But yeah, Men in Black, I really don't expect to have to talk about this for any other week after this one. I just don't see this going anywhere. I think Aladdin will still be outgrossing this next week.
Oof.
So moving on, we'll go to The Secret Life of Pets 2, which is its second week. It actually opened up in 3 more theaters this week, but still had about a 49% drop. It's at 23.8 million, and it just kind of continues the sequel trend this summer. We're not seeing much success outside of the Avengers and John Wick as far as sequels go.
Yeah, it's this movie. So it's Illumination. We talked about this a little bit last week. They're really good at just churning out $70 to $80 million animated movies, and all of their movies cost just that, like right around there, and most of them are incredibly profitable, and they just make a shit ton of money off their animated movies. A lot of them aren't great, and I have a lot of issues with Illumination, but they just make a ton of money. And Secret Life of Pets was a crazy hit, and this movie is really struggling. I mean, we talked about this a lot last week, but it's only at 154 million worldwide. off an $80 million budget. So it's probably going to make its money back. It's probably close to that at some point. I imagine if this gets to like 200 or 250, it'll probably break even. It's probably that break even point. But even still, that's a ridiculous drop off. You're looking at something that's like at least 500 million less as a sequel, that's so absurd. And kind of there's just general sequel and franchise fatigue. It just seems like or just the products aren't as good, and we can talk about that. But it's just it's an unprecedented drop for a movie that was so like not beloved, but just well seen. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of bleeding over. Is something we've just seen a lot of this summer, and I know people say that pretty much every summer, but we've had almost 4 weeks in a row of just these lackluster sequels just kind of bombing or underperforming, and I think Secret Life of Pets is just kind of in there. We talked about last week. I don't think it was marketed as well as it could have been. They didn't even really put out full trailers until a few weeks ago, or at least a month or two ago, and nobody really knew what this movie was about. Apparently, nobody really knows what it's about still, and it's just kind of underperforming with everything else.
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing. Like, even because the first movie, I still haven't seen it, but it's all intents and purposes, it's fine to like whatever. If you're a kid, like it's light and like there's slapstick jokes, so they'll be fine. And if you're an adult, seems like you can tolerate it. So I just don't get it. It's that the marketing must have really not hit home at all, or people just had no idea it was coming, or that's just so weird that such a movie would drop this way. But yeah, it's Universal and Illumination they're not happy about this one. That's for sure.
Yeah, I guess the best way to describe the first movie is it's like the generic brand of Toy Story. Like, it's kind of the same setup. New dog comes in, older dog is jealous, and then set off on the same like adventure as Buzz and Woody do in the first Toy Story. And yeah, I think it's like when you have these movies that come after like the big movie, and you see this with like superhero franchises where you'll have like DC was like, oh, we're gonna do what Marvel did, but with our painted coat on it. And I feel like Secret Life of Pets is just kind of that same thing, and it's quickly fallen apart.
Yeah, it's
much like the DCEU.
Yikes.
So yeah, that kind of wraps up Secret Life of Pets, and then moving on to one of the rare successes this summer is Aladdin, which only had about a 32% drop, still pulled in 16.7 million, and is sitting around 720, almost 725 million worldwide. This is pulling really solid numbers, especially for a movie that a month and a half ago we didn't really know if it was going to be a flop or a success, and this has been one of the most consistent movies this summer. It's consistently been in the top three. I don't think it's actually been below the top three at all since it released, so it's been pulling pretty steady numbers.
Yeah, it's already the third highest grossing movie of the year. It's at 725 million worldwide, just past The Wandering Earth, the Chinese movie that came out and just dropped on Netflix a few weeks ago. But it's doing really well. People love Aladdin, and that's kind of what you get with this movie. It's that story again with live action and weird Will Smith and blue CGI and just stuff like that. So it's just the same thing, and people love Aladdin, and this is just really a testament to that, and just the kind of fervor there's been for just the love that's not love, or just the masses going out to see this movie. It really just has primed me for just how crazy the live action Lion King is. Well, not live action, it's animated, but CGI, whatever. That's a discussion for another day. But just the new Lion King is just gonna go gangbusters at the box office, and everyone's gonna go see that movie. Which is, I'm just preparing my body for that, and it's gonna be a lot, and I'm gonna be on the podcast bitter because it's member berries again. But whatever. it's just this movie's Aladdin's doing really well, and it's, I guess, good for this little startup called Disney. They're doing all right for themselves, and they'll probably be around for a little bit. So yeah, I don't really have much to say. It's doing well.
Just like touching on the Lion King, I actually have pretty high hopes for that, just because I trust Jon Favreau is a storyteller. Like, yeah, it's probably going to fall into a lot of the same trap as Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and all these other remakes have, but I also really liked what Favreau did with the Jungle Book, and I'm hoping he'll take Lion King kind of in that direction. So I'm staying positive. I'm ready for disappointment, but I'm going to stay positive till it comes out.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think I'm just at the point where a lot of these live action movies are just they're just kind of the same thing. So they're at the point where they have to prove me wrong in a sense, which is probably not the way to look at it as a critic going into these movies. But it's just a lot of them are just kind of the same, and that's just kind of boring to me. So yeah, but the Jungle Book is really solid. Jon Favreau is really talented, and he's just really smart director and knows what he's doing. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there. I like being the cynical asshole of the two. It's fun.
Well, that's how I was with Godzilla. So we rotate through that.
We're balancing each other out. We're doing okay.
So we'll move on to a movie that nobody was positive about. Dark Phoenix had a 72.6% drop. This is its second week. It's pulling in 9 million domestic. Simon Kinberg, the director, actually came out this week and took the blame for it, which you don't really see the director taking the blame for a failure, especially when it's only its second week at the box office. So everyone behind this movie is kind of thrown in the towel already. And yeah, Dark Phoenix is fizzling fast.
It dropped 72.6% this week. That's rough. I can't remember a percentage drop that high in forever. Even like Batman v Superman wasn't that high, if I recall correctly. It's just this is rough. Dropped to 9 million already, and it's only made 51 million in the U.S., 204 worldwide, and its reported budget was 200. So we're not going to get anywhere close to making money back on this one. It's probably going to lose Fox just on box office receipts. Probably lose them over $100 million if you're looking at the break-even point, which is typically 2.5 times your production budget. So, or even three times with these crazy blockbusters. So, I don't see this movie making $500-600 million. This is really, I think it just kind of hits home what we talked about last week. This is just kind of sad for X-Men, and I mean, who knows if New Mutants comes out ever, or if it's just dropped on Hulu or something like that. I mean, we're better off not holding our breath on that one. So, I mean, this, for all intents and purposes, is the end of this the current form of the X-Men, and it's just sad because I think about this movie and I think about all the good times and Days of Future Past and Logan, and even going further back, X2 and all these. It's just tough to see these movies just kind of just go without a whimper. It's really tough.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing. And I think Disney or Fox or whatever you want to call them is going to pretty much just sweep this under the rug. And I think, unfortunately, the franchise is just kind of going to go along with it. Because, it's really weird because the X-Men franchise is almost two franchises, just the way they structured like the reboot with First Class, and yeah, it ties in, but it's kind of been its own thing at the same time. But it's still sad to see, kind of the grandfather of all the Marvel properties just die like this.
Yeah, there's just nothing, there's like no silver lining to this at all. It's just a bona fide flop. Pretty bad movie. I still haven't seen anyone that's been like, yeah, this movie was great. Like, there's just nothing. It's just kind of self-serious and depressing and shoddy. And I mean, I guess kudos to Kimber for coming out and taking the blame. I mean, who knows how much of it was truly his fault or not, if he's just being a good guy. But he just knows how to work in a studio system and makes everyone else's feel better about their job if he just comes out and says, hey, my bad. So who knows? Maybe he's just trying to get in deep with Disney and they keep him on for future stuff. I have no idea. So it's just rough. And I haven't really seen any of the actors or actresses really come out and talk about this movie at all. They showed up. They did all of their press tours. They did the they did the Wired thing where they answer people's questions where they Google them on whatever, on Google or whatever, things like that, and they did all their jokey things and did all the stuff like that, and then they just kind of went away and they're gone to the next thing, and they were hoping no one talks about this movie anymore, and it's just a bummer. And we're gonna see this movie drop way out of the top 5 next week, and it'll go away, and then we won't have this anymore, and we'll come back in 5 years and the X-Men will be in the MCU, and we'll be like, oh, this is great, this is awesome, and then the MCU will take over our lives for the rest of eternity. So I'm prepared. You can hear the sadness in my voice.
I think, unfortunately, this movie's kind of going to end up like the Blade franchise, where like you'll see it on Hulu, 5 years from now, and you'll look back and you're like, oh yeah, I guess people used to be okay with that kind of superhero movie. You'll like acknowledge it in the moment and then forget it exists every moment out of that.
Yeah, all the hipsters would be like, yeah, you guys like your Marvel movies, but I remember when it was really cool to like the X-Men back in the day, and yeah, we had they weren't very good, but they were something, right? And we'll be like, yeah, stop talking. But yeah, it's just, this is sad. I don't really want to talk about this anymore. It's just a bummer.
So, talking about a better performing movie, Rocket Man is still hanging on in the top 5 with 8 million this week. It's its 3rd week at the box office, or actually 8.8 million. Only had a 36.3% drop, which, kind of like Aladdin, this late in the game, that's pretty impressive. And Rocket Man is just earning a steady paycheck. It's like, we've talked about it before. It's not going to pull Bohemian numbers, but it is pulling enough numbers to warrant its own existence and make a nice little profit for Paramount.
Yeah, it's already tripled its budget. It's at 133 million worldwide off a $40 million budget. So it's doing well in that respect. And I think we're going to see this movie really just kind of pepper in like 5 or 6 million every week for the next couple of weeks, and really just kind of slowly creep up its domestic and worldwide intake, and maybe even get close to 200 million. I don't see that happening, but it'll probably get close to that, and it'll probably be a decent hit. And I foresee Rocket Man being a really good, like a really big at-home rental movie, where people didn't necessarily want to pull the trigger on seeing it there, but they're like, oh yeah, I wanted to see that, so it'll probably make a bunch of money there. So it's doing fine. I think it's definitely, Paramount definitely wanted this to be with any movie you want it to be a breakaway hit, but I think they were really hoping that this one would be a big deal, and they would push Taron Egerton for Best Actor and all these different things and whatnot, and maybe Elton John makes an appearance at the Oscar campaign and stuff like that. But I don't really see that happening. I think this movie's just going to be a solid hit for Paramount, and then it'll just kind of have its life on Netflix or whatever streaming service it goes to after that.
Wait till Paramount has their streaming service. It'll be musical biopics only.
God, that'd be the saddest streaming service. What would they have? Just Transformers movies, A Quiet Place.
Be better than the Lionsgate service.
Oh God, what would that one? Twilight, Hunger Games, Hellboy. Oof. Yikes!
So,
Paramount. Poor Paramount.
Moving on from some delusional streaming services, had 2 other movies open up wide this weekend. Neither one of them cracked the top 5. Really, we have 3, depending on how you want to look at it. But first is the second Shaft reboot, 3rd movie named Shaft, to debut with 8.3 million. I haven't been able to find an estimated budget for it yet, but considering you have Samuel L. Jackson and this is kind of an action blockbuster, I'm assuming it was much higher than 8 million. And yeah, I just don't know if this movie was A, anything people really wanted, and B, I don't think Shaft as a character works in 2019. This character, the original Shaft, is kind of famous because it was a 70s huge blaxploitation film, and basically, like, if you talk to anybody on the internet, the only thing they know about Shaft is that he hits women sometimes. Donald Glover has a really good bit about it. If you're bored, look that up. But yeah, I just don't think Shaft works with a modern audience, and I think this is kind of reflective of that.
Yeah, I've seen estimates around 30 million for this movie, which I mean, yeah, a little like you said, a little more than 8. So this isn't great. This isn't good. Like you said, like why does this movie exist? We had the first couple Shaft movies, then there was a Shaft TV show, I think, and then we had the reboot, and I think it was 2000. It was with Samuel and it was with I think Christian Bale was the was the bad guy in that movie, young Christian Bale. And so now we have Shaft 2019, which is supposedly a reboot of the 2000 movie, but Sam Jackson's in it, and I'm really confused. This just feels like this is just like Warner Brothers saying, all right, what do we got? We have this Shaft thing. Do people like Shaft? So I don't know. Let's just throw it out there and see what happens. And Sam Jackson's still vibrant in 10 movies a year, so we'll see what happens there. And yeah, I just, like you said, like this is just a weird choice for 2019. And like I think even in the trailer they joke about him hitting women and it's like, this isn't great. I'm not really interested in this. This doesn't look fun. So I think Usher's kid's in this movie, so that's something. It's probably not good, but it's something. It's this is not good. I don't really see, like, this will probably leave more than half of its theaters next week with a bunch of other movies coming in, and this is a squirrely one. I don't really understand why this exists.
Yeah. So apparently there were 3 Shaft movies in the
That's
in
right.
71, 72, 73. Really the only like true hit the Shaft franchise has had is like the original from 1971. This is basically Men in Black. Like they've had one hit and they just keep trying to remake it and like go off the steam from the original, and they just haven't figured it out.
Yeah, this is directed by Tim Story, and if you don't know that name, you've seen his movies. He's a director for hire. I couldn't tell you what his style is, but he's just all over. Just like he did the Fantastic Four movies, the Fox, what the original ones, I guess, are, Ride Along and Ride Along 2 and Think Like a Man, and like he's just a director for hire. Does all these different movies, and so he doesn't really have anything. He did Barbershop and all these other things. So he's a working man. He's gonna make his movies and he's gonna film that script, and you're gonna hopefully go see it. I mean, he's good for him. He's making a lot of movies. He's 50 years old, still making movies, so good for him. But yeah, this is just a stone cold corporate product. That's what this movie is, and they kind of failed. And we're seeing that a lot. People just don't really care about your dumb IPs. It's just stop trying to do it. Maybe is the lesson here. I don't know. It's just there's just no artistic really integrity to this movie. It's just there, and they thought that maybe it would make a cool amount of money, but no, they failed. So sorry, Shaft.
Yeah, this movie exists, and that's about all it will ever do.
Yep.
Oh. So moving on, just want to make a quick note of John Wick Chapter 3. It dropped in a little over 700 theaters, but only had about a 18% dip. So this, like Aladdin, has been one of the most consistent movies this summer. And then one of the wide releases this week was Late Night. It debuted last week in about 4 theaters, had a little bit over 2,000 more theaters this week. And, it's not pulling superb numbers. It's not going to be as big a hit for Amazon like The Big Sick was a couple years ago. But I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was very sincere, and it juggles a lot of like characters and arcs, and it's really surprising just how much they were able to fit into this movie. And I feel like it could have very easily been just a huge mess. But it was just really well directed, really charming, well written. It's definitely like a very niche movie. Like it definitely isn't appealing to most audiences, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's definitely an old person movie, right? It's just
Yeah.
it really just fits that demographic. It looks very pleasant and comical, and Emma Thompson's great, and she's been on the screen for a while, so that's just good for people who grew up with her. And this is a movie I'm really looking forward to. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but it was really one of the biggest tickets at Sundance, like I mentioned last week. And Amazon bought this movie for $14 million. So from that perspective, it's made about a little over about 5.5 million so far. So it's definitely got to do some more work there in order to really become a moneymaker for them. But they, like you mentioned, they were kind of hoping this movie would kind of break out like The Big Sick and just kind of roll out into more theaters and make a really, really steady amount of money for over a lot of weeks, and that maybe would lead to a Oscar campaign later in the year. And so, but right now, that doesn't look incredibly promising. I mean, we'll see. I think next week is going to be the make or break week, so we'll see if this movie kind of sticks around 5 million or even gets like a little increase, because it's not really going to enter many more theaters than it has right now. It's about in 2,200 right now. So, I definitely want to check this movie out, and it's getting good reviews. So it looks great. It looks fun. Mindy Kaling is delightful. Emma Thompson is delightful. So I kind of hope this movie does well in future weeks. We should definitely circle back on this one to see how it does.
Yeah, my only real complaint with this movie is there's a scene where they're like talking about ratings compared to all the other late night hosts, because besides Emma Thompson's character, they use real examples for her competition, and for whatever reason they talk about Jimmy Fallon like he's the king of late night right now, which that just really bothers me because it's the complete opposite. like I feel like you could plug him into the story that Emma Thompson's character has in this movie, where like she's under threat of cancellation, and that's like Jimmy Fallon's real life right now. And it's like that just like really bothers me, and I'm gonna stay awake at night just thinking about that. But yeah,
well,
this movie is like,
who is the king of late night right now? Is it Kimmel? Is it someone else? And Samantha Bee? Does anyone watch late night television anymore?
I don't think like they get into that in the movie. They talk about like a lot of how it's like YouTube based, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I like that.
The modern late night is like probably like Kimmel or Corden. Conan is like still late night sort of, but not really. So yeah, like if you're a fan of like the late night television shows and their process, which I am, like I've always just kind of like I used to stay up to watch Conan back in the day on NBC when that was a thing. But yeah, like if you're a fan of like late night comics or just like the process around that, this movie is made for like late night TV show people, which is why it doesn't have just a lot of broad appeal, because most of the late night people are like old people that grew up with Carson and Letterman, and Carson's dead and Letterman's retired, so that's kind of its audience problem. But
I wonder if there's a bunch of boomers. I wonder if there's a bunch of boomers out there yelling at us for calling them old right now for liking this movie. I don't know. Yeah. Hey, we'll check our DMs later for that one, I guess.
But there, like at the same time, there's a lot of really good, like relevant young people humor. Like and they show it in one of the trailers. There's like one of her segments is she becomes a white savior for this YouTube segment, and so like she asks people in New York like what their biggest problem with like being judged based on their race is, and this guy's like, well, I can never hail a cab. And so she like hails a cab for him and shoves him in. He's like, I don't need to go anywhere. She's like, no, I just saved you. Just shoves him in the cab and sends him on his way.
That's funny.
It's really smart. And I would imagine, obviously, Amazon owns it. They're gonna pump it pretty hard on Amazon streaming stuff. But I really enjoyed it. Would like to see it continue on with some pretty good legs.
Yeah, I think and Amazon's been doing this for some of their movies. If we see this movie kind of drop off rather quickly, they might just pull it from theaters and just immediately put it on Amazon Prime and be available to rent too. So Amazon, they're kind of figuring it out with their smaller movies, and I think they definitely can work on the fly, because this movie was originally supposed to go wide from the start, and they pivoted at the last second, figured that they should probably build some more buzz for it. So, which is why we saw it open in 4 theaters last week, and it did really well in 4 theaters. So that seemed like the right move in all this. So Amazon will figure out a way for this movie to have a life beyond its theatrical release, I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I agree. So moving on, another semi-wide release. Not really. It only opened up in about 600 more theaters. Was The Dead Don't Die? Is Bill Murray, Adam Driver, um, Tilda Swinton wields a katana in this movie. Zombie movie. I haven't seen it yet,
Sure.
but I'm excited to see it. It's it only opened to about 2.3 million, so it's not going to be a huge hit. I think they were kind of hoping it'd be a Shaun of the Dead type thing where it just comes in comedically, takes over, and becomes a big hit. This may be a cult hit, kind of like Shaun of the Dead. Seen a lot of that as well, but I just don't see this being a huge success if it does actually open with a wider release.
Yeah, so this is a Jim Jarmusch movie, and he's like the really like the hipster like cinephiles like wet dream because no one in the mainstream really knows Jim Jarmusch, but many people who've seen a lot of his movies, and he's actually a blind spot on my record as a film fan. But everyone who's seen a lot of his movies considers him as one of the best working directors today. So he definitely has his audience, but he's never made any movies that have been big box office wise. I think the highest grossing movie he's made was, I think it was Broken Flowers, which came out early 2000s. Another Bill Murray movie, and it made like 13 million. So his movies are very odd, and I wonder if people went to The Dead Don't Die expecting it to be a pretty like mainstream movie, and it sounds like it's not that at all. So yeah, it's kind of par for the course
Yeah,
for Jim Jarmusch movies. So
yeah, no, it's
yeah,
definitely an indie movie, and
yeah. Like there's gonna be some people who just like, oh, it's a zombie movie, I'll go see this, and it's just like it'll just be. I imagine from the Jim Jarmusch movies I've seen, it'll just be people just kind of talking to each other, and nothing on like the outside is really happening, but that's just kind of how he likes to operate. One of his movies came out a few years ago called Patterson, which was also with Adam Driver. It's just kind of about a bus driver. It's about a week in his life. He writes poetry, and nothing really happens in that movie. It's just kind of him living life for like an hour and a half, and that's just kind of it. And it's great, but that's just not going to appeal to wider audiences. And I think Jim Jarmusch knows that, but he's just out here making his thing. And I think this cast for this movie is incredible with Adam Driver, Bill Murray, and Selena Gomez is in there, and Iggy Pop, and it's just a bizarre cast. And people really like, if you know Jim Jarmusch and that's kind of your thing, like you really love him. So but yeah, Jim Jarmusch he doesn't ever make a movie that's for big wide audiences. He does his own cult thing, and he's really good at it. And his movies are really interesting, the ones I've seen. And I actually need to do some type of binge and watch a bunch of his movies sometime soon because I've really liked the ones I've seen. But yeah, this movie was just never really for wide audiences, and it's actually kind of surprising that it got into 600 theaters. I'm interested to see how it does in future weeks, and hopefully it makes some money. But because it's fun when these kind of filmmakers get to keep making really interesting movies on some type of budget. But yeah, I definitely want to go see this movie. I think this was just never going to be a big hit, and I think they all knew that, but I'm not sure. We'll see. I'm pretty sure Focus Features wanted more from this, but yeah, it's definitely not for John Q, a moviegoer.
yeah. So one more just brief note to make about this week's, and then we'll talk about a little preview of next week's box office is The Last Black Man in San Francisco opened up with another small release. It's still only in 36 theaters, so not really pulling box office numbers yet because it hasn't opened very wide. But I know you saw it this week and seemed to really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's really great. It's really, really fantastic. It's a little long. It's a little over 2 hours, and it definitely feels its length a little bit, and especially towards the end. But it is strikingly beautiful in the way it captures San Francisco and gentrification within it, and it's really, really funny. The two leads, Jimmy Fails and Jonathan Majors, are ridiculously good, and I hope this movie continues to expand and finds an audience because I think those two are very worthy of some type of nomination down the line. But this movie is great, and it's just a solid A24 movie with a lot on its mind, and it has a few of those like moments where you're just astonished at just how beautiful it is. And I really love this movie, and I hope we'll see how it works in future weeks. I mean, it did really well in 36 theaters. It made about 3 what is that? I can't see numbers, but it's made about 10,000 per screen. So it's doing really well from that perspective. So hopefully it continues to strike up an audience as it slowly expands. This is definitely an A24 movie that people can. It's very accessible. So from that perspective, I foresee this movie doing pretty well. But yeah, definitely keep an eye out on this one. It's really great.
Yeah, and so next week we have the end of this box office slump. Toy Story 4 is going to be $1 billion movie. There's no way it isn't.
Yeah, easy.
Right now it's sitting at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty average for Toy Story. I think they're all sitting at 99 or 100, and this is after 94 reviews. They've somehow done it again with the fourth installment. Which is insane.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. This is $1 billion movie. I think this will probably outgross Captain Marvel, take the number 2 spot for the year for now. This is just going to be huge.
I think that's a safe bet. Yeah, we can easily pencil this in for 900 million to $1 billion. It's going to happen. I haven't seen what the tracking is, but if this movie doesn't make around 200 million, in its first weekend, I'd be kind of surprised. It's just, everyone loves Toy Story. If you don't like Toy Story, then everyone just kind of thinks you suck. Who that's a weird take to have. It's a weird thing to not like. I was a little nervous about a fourth Toy Story, but it seems like they've done a really solid job with it. So I'm really looking forward to this movie. I'm sure it's going to be really delightful.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got a 100 on Rotten Tomatoes right now, like I said a minute ago, but, Armand White has not reviewed it yet. So
yeah, we're waiting for him, right?
Just for anybody that doesn't know who Armand White is, he is the antithesis to a critic. He disagrees with everybody on everything. He made Man of Steel his 2013 movie of the year. Toy Story 3 sat at 100 for quite a while on Rotten Tomatoes, and he gave it its only negative review, which I have pulled up just because I think it is hilarious, and I want to read an excerpt of his review of Toy Story 3.
Oh, this is great.
In Armand White's words, this is Toy Story 3. Is so besotted with brand names and product placement that it stops being about the innocent pleasures of imagination, the usefulness of toys, and strictly celebrates consumerism. But none of these digital cartoon characters reflect human experience. It's essentially a board game that only the brainwashed will buy into. Besides, Transformers 2 already explored the same plot to greater thrill and opulence.
Yikes. What a take by my man Armand. Oh my god. That's scaldingly hot. Oh god. I love it.
So I can't wait to see him compare Toy Story 4 to Suicide Squad or something like that.
I think he famously said that I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry is the movie of a generation or something like that. So it was just something absurd where he thought it was the most ingenious thing ever. So I love it. This is hilarious.
Yeah, he likes video game movies, which should be the first red flag that you see there. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be a tearjerker. I really like Toy Story. We didn't think was going to come back. There was no real reason to, and the only way I can see them giving a meaningful story is if they actually split up Buzz and Woody, and the gang goes their separate ways. Which obviously will just destroy the theater. But I hope they actually give it another conclusion, which would be hard to do after already concluding it in Toy Story 3. But I mean, Pixar's proven they can do miracles with this franchise. So
yeah, it's one of those things with Pixar. You're either going to cry at the beginning of the movie or you're going to cry at the end. It's one of the two or both. Who knows? But yeah, it's when in the trailer when the spork talks to Woody, and he's like, "Why am I alive?" And I'm like, "Oh no, this is a kids movie." This is it's just the kind of stuff that this franchise or just all Pixar movies have always dealt with, and just they find really interesting ways to talk about death and loss and moving on with your life and growing up. So that's just I was just always scared that a fourth movie would kind of taint what the three Toy Story movies done before, but it looks like there's no problem with that. And other critics that I really look up to seem to feel that way after seeing the movie at early screenings. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to make all the money in the world and just do really well, and we're going to be talking about it for weeks.
Yeah, and I'm also interested to see how Child's Play, the reboot, performs next week. Because we're starting to like really heavily get into that wave of horror reboots and remakes that it started. And like Child's Play is a weird franchise to reboot because like they're still making movies in the original series. Like I think the last one came out to Netflix a year ago. So they're like rebooting it, but also pumping out direct to video like Chucky sequels. So I don't really know where this one's gonna land. I don't know if Child's Play really has the following that like Halloween or even Stephen King has. I'm really curious to see how this movie lands next week.
Yeah, it looks like Child's Play Genesis, doesn't it? It's just where Chucky is like basically he's an app at this point.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's weird. Like it's as you mentioned, they're making the original series is still going, and there's going to be a TV show in that franchise coming out next year, and which is just bizarre. And because MGM owned the rights to the original Child's Play, they can spin it off how they please. So really bizarre, and it's just a weird place to have this movie because we're going to have Annabelle coming out just 5 days after that. So we have another killer doll movie within the same week, which is just so weird to me. So it's just, and Aubrey Plaza and Brian Tyree Henry they're in these movies, and Mark Hamill is the voice of Chucky, which is, I mean, kind of great, but it's just so bizarre when put into the whole context of it. It's just weird, and I mean, we can talk about it a little bit too. But there's another movie, looks like it's Jane Wick essentially, or Russian Wick with Anna coming out, which is another R movie, and I'm curious if those two will kind of cannibalize each other because they're both hard. They look like they're both hard R, and maybe they appeal to the same market, but it's just weird. I just don't really, I don't understand why Child's Play is a thing in this form. It's just it's really weird.
Yeah, I think it's kind of gonna be like Men in Black International and just really be pasted together. So like Mark Hamill wasn't announced as the voice of Chucky until like 2 months ago, which considering he's kind of the icon and the star, that's pretty unusual. For something this big or that, has as much of a following as Child's Play has. So I really have no idea where this is going to land. I mean,
this movie could make nothing, and I think I would bet on it making nothing, or it's could be like a little sleeper hit. I mean, I can't imagine the budget is too big on it, so I don't know. It's one of those oddities. It's people it's really funny in this day and age of IP that we talked about earlier. It's just people are doing whatever they can to make money off of things they've already made before. So it is really, really weird.
Yeah, and the marketing so far for it has pretty much just been like posters of dismembered Toy Story characters. Other than the fact that Chucky's an app in the trailer, I really don't know like what all this is going to add to anything. So I like don't know where it's going to land. I could see it like very quickly becoming irrelevant. This will be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I wonder if the main fans are just gonna hate it just out of principle because they are already so into the ongoing Chucky series, and they're just kind of angry that this is a thing to begin with. So that's also something to look at. People might not even give this movie a chance, which is kind of weird. But this is bizarre. It's such a weird choice.
Yeah, I mean, it may be one of those things where like you just have people that would rather watch one of the 8 Chucky movies on Netflix than go out and see, the reboot of it. So
Yeah, very,
who
very
knows?
possible.
So yeah, that's kind of the preview for next week, and that pretty much wraps up this episode. So we'll be back next week talking about Toy Story 4, Child's Play, and Anna. Thanks for listening to this episode of the MovieBabble Podcast. Again, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com and join us next week as we talk about the opening weekend for Toy Story 4, Child's Play, and Anna.